and Justice Watch, who are going to talk about property tax foreclosure.
Hey everyone, my name is Carlos, here with Justice Watch. Emeline, you want to say hi?
Yeah, Carlos is going to get us started, but I'm Emeline. I'm a reporter actually with the Investigative Project on Race and Equity, but our newsrooms were working together for this reporting.
Yep. So we have a slideshow for y'all. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Whoops. I don't know why it's not letting me now. Okay, it's acting weird. Emeline, could you share your screen? Sorry.
All right, I'll give me 1 second.
Yep, I can see it.
All right, you can see my whole screen and all of my, let's see, how do I make this? I'm sorry, y'all, I'm used to using Google Meets at this point, and I am,
it's
there
okay.
we go.
Yeah, there you go. You got it.
Looks perfect.
All right, so we covered that. There's a tiny URL in case people want to plug that in and read the full story later.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll be taking the first half here, and so we today, and apologies in advance if you hear my AC unit in the background, or if I have to yell at my dog to get off the couch at some point. I will try to mute before doing so. Yeah, property tax foreclosure in Illinois, to be specific. So, if you're like us, when we started out on this reporting project, we had no idea what any of this meant. And so it's been a wild ride learning all this stuff. So I say that, and it took us a very long time to get to this point. So don't feel discouraged. If you feel confused at any point, please make sure to ask any and all questions at the end. But so every year in Cook County in Illinois, every county in Illinois has this auction, this annual tax sale. And what this tax sale is it's an auction for delinquent property tax bills. So if in Cook County, for example, property taxes are paid in 2 installments, say you miss installment number 1 for this year, if you don't pay that bill within a year, it goes up for auction. It becomes delinquent and it goes up for grabs at this annual tax sale. And at this annual tax sale, you have these investors, also known as tax buyers, who will bid for the rights to buy your lien, essentially. So what this does is the tax buyers will pay what you owe, will pay the county what you owe, and then they get the certificate that says that they've paid your debt, and now they own the lien. And so homeowners who are caught in this situation have between 30 to 36 months to pay off this debt, which includes the original amount of taxes owed, plus an extra bevy of fines and fees, plus the interest that now you owe the tax buyer, because that is the name of the game here, is that all of these liens come with statutory interest rates between that start off at 0%, but by the end can be 36% of interest that you have to pay in order for you to keep your house. And if you don't redeem, the tax buyer can foreclose on your home, and then it's theirs. They get the deed to your house, and they have no obligation to give you back anything of value for your house. Next slide. Thanks, Emma. So every state has a system to recoup delinquent taxes. Most states, however, will auction the entire property to pay off the delinquent taxes. These are known as tax deed states. So this is the system that most states use, where if you, your taxes become delinquent, you don't pay, and after a certain amount of time, the local taxing district will just auction your property to pay off your delinquent taxes. But Illinois, however, is one of about a dozen states who use a lien system, so it's tax lien system. It's also known for being one of the most complicated property tax codes and tax sale laws in the country. And the other thing that makes Illinois very unique as well is that, unlike in other states, taxing districts here, like Cook County, have very little discretion over how these tax sales are conducted. So all of this really is dependent on Springfield laying the rules of the game for the entire state. Next slide, please, Emma. Thank you. So this is what we found is that every year, hundreds of Cook County homeowners lose their homes and the generational wealth attached to them through this system of tax foreclosure here. In the last 6 years, more than 1,000 homeowners in Cook County lost their homes this way and lost all their equity. And we also found that seniors, so people over 65, were most likely to have their liens bought by tax buyers at the annual sale. Now, by that we mean, say there are 10,000 properties that go up for auction at this sale, less than half end up actually getting picked up by investors. And one of the most kind of determinant factors as to whether or not a house would get picked up at that sale is if it has a senior tax, if a senior owns it, and we know that because they have the senior property tax freeze. No, sorry, I'm blanking out. But basically, it's a property tax discount that's only available for people over 65 and over. And if your house has that, like the target rate for your house being bought at the auction is like 90% plus. So Emeline, did you intend to play the video for folks? I didn't get to ask you that earlier.
I think in the interest of time, I'll just use this as an encouragement for folks to go to the article itself and play this video of one of our main sources, Miss Velma Lewis.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, please. And you can go on YouTube directly and type in, I think, Cook County tax foreclosure, and it should come up. So these foreclosures were predominantly disproportionately impacting Black homeowners, especially on the south side and the west side of Cook County. The vast majority of the foreclosures were in zip codes where a majority of residents were Black. And some of the more impacted neighborhoods were Roseland, Greater Grand Crossing, Chicago Heights. And you can see in that map, and again, it would be, if you look at the story, you'll be able to see this map in greater detail, but they're heavily concentrated in a very small part of the county. We also found that there are very few resources available for homeowners who face delinquency or foreclosure due to property taxes. So there are, this is not to say that there's a lot of help for other situations, but if you need rental assistance or mortgage foreclosure assistance, there are programs available to you that are sponsored by the state of Illinois or the city of Chicago or Cook County, or nonprofits. Like there's at least a network of potential places where you can go for help. But when it comes to tax foreclosure, when you owe delinquent property taxes, the amount of resources available to you are very few and very far in between. For example, like one of these programs, the Northwest Home Equity program, is only available to people who live in a certain, like in a very small part of the county, and like they offer, for example, they pay off, I think, the property taxes up to a certain amount. But again, you have to live in like a very specific part of the county. Otherwise, you really are screwed. And to kind of quantify the loss, you know, this is a huge and profitable business for the people involved here, because like in this example, this investor, you know, this homeowner fell behind their tax bill by $100. Now that might seem very low, but if you're a senior on a fixed income, emergency, or you just missed a payment, whatever, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, that tax bill went unpaid, and so it went up for auction. Somebody bought it, and because that homeowner didn't pay it off, that property went to this investor, and this property was assessed by the county to be valued at 50 grand. And these types of examples are everywhere in the data. You know, like homes worth $200,000 were acquired for $5,000. You know, and you know, so basically, with a little bit of capital and a little bit of time, you can really come up on an investment here. But obviously, at the other end of this is our families who lose all this equity through this process. Next slide. Thanks, everyone. And like we mentioned earlier, Illinois is very unique, literally one of one, in that there is no way for homeowners to recoup their lost equity, or at least a guaranteed way for homeowners to lose, to recoup their home equity through this process. So in other states, there's systems in place, particularly mainly an auction system, in which, you know, either your home gets auctioned or the tax debt gets auctioned, whatever, and it goes for bidding, and whatever gets bid above what you owe, you get to keep. And even those systems are, you know, bad at giving people the true value of their homes, but at least it's something. In Illinois, you get nothing. There's no right for you to get, like, you're not guaranteed any of the equity you're losing through this process. Now, there is like a way to redeem some funds. It's through this indemnity fund system. It's basically you as a homeowner, as a former homeowner, have to sue the county to get paid out through this indemnity fund. And you have to meet these like requirements as to why you deserve to get paid out. But even if you make it all the way through, you still have to wait years, sometimes even a decade, to get any money back, because the indemnity fund is insolvent. The fund is basically paid. It's that pot of money is paid through the fees collected through this tax sale system, but it's not enough, and so you have like people waiting years and years and years and years before they get paid out. Like all this came to a head really in May 2023, when the Supreme Court came down with this decision in this Supreme Court case called Tyler versus Hennepin County. Actually, next slide, Emeline. We kind of yeah. So this is a quick breakdown of this very important Supreme Court ruling. So court, in a 9-0 decision, unanimous decision, said homeowners are entitled to this, what they called excess equity, after losing their home to tax foreclosure. So you know, this case was out of Minnesota, and it involved an elderly woman who lost her condo to tax foreclosure. She didn't, and then so the county auctioned the condo for more than twice than what she owed, and then it pocketed the difference. And the Supreme Court said, no, that is a violation of people's constitutional rights. Chief Justice John Roberts had this pithy quote. It's like, the taxpayer must render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but no more. And so this decision really upended this entire industry, because now people have a legal right to that excess equity. And so you have a state like Illinois, where people were not getting any of the equity back, now really facing this dilemma of how do we reform our system in a way that's compliant and protects people's constitutional right to their home equity. And I think I'm going to hand it off to Emeline.
Yeah, I'm gonna touch back on what's next and what's happening now. In light of the Tyler v. Hennepin decision and the fact that lawmakers have not yet passed a reform. But we'll go through the data a little bit that we use to draw these conclusions and analyze where foreclosures are happening. We used a lot of data, primarily from the Treasurer's Office, which is the office that has the mandate of carrying out the annual tax sale every year. But we wanted to pull in other data to understand the fuller picture, and because other offices in the county have different responsibilities tied to tax sales and tax foreclosures, we needed the county clerk's data to look at tax deeds, and that's when a foreclosure happens. Basically, a tax deed is issued by the courts and the county clerk records it. We also used exemption data and assessed value data from the assessor's public records, public data. And that, it was a little bit rough, but it allowed us to sort of get a rough estimate of which of the properties belonged to homeowners and which of those homeowners were senior homeowners, as well as to draw the assessed value of the house in the year of the foreclosure. And these are all sorts of contested ways of estimating how much a house is worth. I think in some of the lawsuits that are playing out right now, there are a lot of arguments about how to determine the value of a house and how much equity should be returned to a homeowner. But you can only work with what you got. So that's what we worked with. And then also, of course, the sheriff's office maintains eviction records for evictions carried out in tax foreclosures. And the circuit court has the case files for all tax deed cases. And that led, we did some pretty simple data work in the end, joining of a lot of cleaning and a lot of joining, usually using the property identification number. That was the most essential value that allowed us to pull these data sets together. And it allowed us to see some interesting trends over time. I'll show you one on the next slide. And Carlos referenced it earlier. We were really interested in looking at how senior homeowners were impacted by the system. Carlos mentioned earlier that I think on average in the last 10 years, senior homeowners, and that's to say homes that had a senior exemption attached to it in the year of the tax sale, to be really specific. On average, 96% of all homes with senior exemptions, that went into the tax sale ended up having their liens bought by investors, which was the highest rate of any group we were able to observe in that 10-year span. And, for context, experts told us that they didn't think that investors were literally targeting houses owned by seniors, but that houses owned by seniors, older adults, tended to have the most equity built up in them. And so they were compelling investments for them. And then also, we were able to chart out that last year's tax sale, which happened in December of 2024, there was the highest number of homes with senior exemptions in the last 10 years. And, I put in a link to pull up the spreadsheet, but I don't think it's so interesting that I have to pull away from it's a lot of property identification numbers and dollar amounts. And just a brief history of foreclosure. I invite you to visit the full article where we have a fun interactive timeline element that has a lot more detail about all of the many attempts to reform these laws in the last almost 75 years. This foreclosure ability dates back to 1951, which is when lawmakers lobbied by tax buying interests. And a big name among those is Alan Blair. Carlos, did I get his name right? I'm having a brain moment.
Yeah, you did.
Thank you very much. All right. Alan Blair tended to take a lot of credit with him. He died in the 1970s. But that amendment that lawmakers wrote in allowed tax buyers for the first time to foreclose on homeowners' debts. There had been tax buyers before. They had been active in buying liens in the sale, but they weren't necessarily, there wasn't a legal mechanism necessarily for them to foreclose and take a person's whole property over an unpaid, an unsettled debt, an unsettled lien. Newspapers, and I included these pictures of these books. The first, The Black Tax by Andrew Carl and Plundered by Bernadette Atuahene, because they're just really rich histories. The Black Tax focusing especially on Chicago tax buying. And they really detail community-led fights, lawyers' endeavors, legislators' endeavors to reform and overturn some of these laws, which came to be known as really harsh. Royko wrote a ton of columns in 1969, sort of detailing the older adults and just the everyday people who had no idea their taxes had been sold until it was too late and faced losing homes they had built in some cases, or homes they hoped to pass on to their next of kin. So I highly recommend those two books. In 1976, lawmakers had a legislative investigative commission do a full report on the statutes that inform tax buying. And they came to some pretty stark conclusions, as you can see in the bolded text. They really strongly urged lawmakers to reform these laws. But I urge you to go to the article and go through the whole timeline function. But that didn't happen, though there were many dozens of attempts to reform, or at least to soften, the property tax sales system in Illinois. And the majority of those bigger efforts have failed. So now what? We have a Supreme Court decision requiring states to ensure homeowners receive home equity back in the case of foreclosure. There were a number of reform proposals that lawmakers submitted in the spring session earlier this year, but even those with backing from Cook County officials stalled out, did not pass by the end of session. Lawmakers have said they plan to return to the issue, and I'm sorry, I'm going to remove my cat from the table before he steps on my computer. They will plan to return and hopefully pass something in the fall veto session, but that we'll have to wait and see what happens. And as Carlos already said, in the meantime, there are dozens of lawsuits, some seeking class action certification, one which recently received class action certification, are working their way through the courts and making all sorts of arguments about whether tax buyers or the county are liable for producing this lost equity for these not 1,000+ homeowners, but homeowners who have recently lost their homes. And I wanted to end on we've spent a lot of time thinking about the Supreme Court decision and how Illinois, experts have told us, is the last to come into compliance with it fully. But so much of what we heard in interviews with homeowners and also from advocates is how, most of the time people don't really want to check in exchange for their house. They want to be able to continue to live in their house, whether because they want to live out their life there, because they would like to pass it on to their next of kin. So I just wanted to highlight two quotes, one from Cook County Public Guardian Charles Goldberg, whose office has spent a long time representing older and disabled homeowners who get caught in this system, and who's really has urged and introduced legislation in past years to try and soften the impacts on disabled and older adult homeowners specifically, which Illinois currently doesn't do. So just to point out that coming in line with the Constitution doesn't mean that's an end to what Illinois lawmakers should do to protect people from unfairly losing their home. And also, this is an excerpt from a paper by Bernadette Atuahene, whose book I pointed out a couple slides ago, who developed a concept of dignity taking, and who also points out, I think it's a similar idea that there's a deprivation of dignity that occurs with involuntary property loss. And yeah, I just wanted everyone to sit with that as we think about like Illinois moving forward and reforming its system to develop a system where people still lose their homes, but are guaranteed some amount of money in exchange for it. But with that, that's our last slide. Thank you all so much for being here. And yeah, we're really eager for questions and comments. So I will go ahead and end this slideshow so I can see everybody.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for that presentation, for that material. And I'd like to move on to some of the questions. And again, as I read out some of the questions and as the presenters are giving answers, please feel free to keep the questions coming in our chat. A question from the audience. You mentioned a lot of cleaning about the data sources, cleaning of the data sources. What were some challenges that came up during that cleaning? Things like matching IDs across sources, missing data, etc. Are there tips that you have for working with these kinds of data sources?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so probably many people in the room have more data skills than I do, but I would say that the sheriff's data was probably the most challenging to clean, in that the data provided over the 10-year period had many different fields in the years they provided that ended up being not critical for some of the calculations and analyses we did. Carlos, what's coming to your mind? I think honestly, just making sure that the PIN didn't have hyphens, and that we were looking at the data correctly, and just really sure we were understanding what we were looking at. Carlos, jump in if you have a better memory on this than I do, but this was a couple months ago now, so.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the challenges with data, especially housing data in Cook County, is that it is widely accessible and there's a lot at your fingertips, but there's also like so many agencies involved in the data, and they don't keep it uniformly across agencies. So you have like data sets from the treasurer's office, and then another one from the assessor's office, and then another one from the clerk's office, and another one from the recorder of deeds. And so all these four agencies have all the information that you need, that we needed. But finding how to ask for it was a huge challenge. And again, because it's like divvied up between all of them, there is no uniform way of keeping track of it. And it was, at some point it became ridiculous, really. Like, for example, with, we had a basic question that at least I thought was basic, which was like, how much did people owe before they lost the home? So it's in technical terms, what was the redemption amount people needed to pay in order to save their homes from foreclosure. And apparently there is no one keeps that. No, like digitally at least. Like it exists in the rolls, in like on the 4th floor or whatever of the county building in the treasurer's office or whatever. But like there is no centralized place where that piece of information is getting recorded. And there were other questions like that too. So it was, I think the most challenging for me, like some of the more challenging aspects of the data for us was like just meeting the limitations of county bureaucracy head on, and yeah, just being disappointed a lot at every turn that like things weren't kept in a better way or kept at all, so. But what I will say, Emeline, once Emeline really took the lead on the joining and the matching, and I appreciate them for that, because I really don't have the skills to do all that stuff. But once Emeline figured it out, we were able to pull a lot of information. So like, real estate is one of those things that you can't hide. It's just like public data is available for a lot of it. And so we were able to make a lot of important findings through it. It's just, there were aspects of it that we wish we had to.
Yeah, I'll add in one other comment on the exemptions. I think it was interesting talking to people who work closely with homeowners about that. It was the best way we could find to sort of figure out what kind of homeowners were getting pulled into and who they were really. But, depending on who we talked to, some people were concerned that for senior exemptions, say it wasn't a reliable number because sometimes people, older adult homeowners will pass away and their next of kin may continue living in there and paying the taxes under their name and not really technically qualify for a senior exemption. However, in the end, like we felt it was a reliable number because of the almost, I don't think there's anyone who would deny that there are probably an equal number, if not more, of people who qualify for a senior exemption but aren't receiving it for one reason or another. But so we had to treat it as kind of a rough estimate, but it took us a while to be like, okay, we can work with this number. This feels good.
There was a similar question, data-related question about kind of logistics of how the join. We heard a little bit about during the presentation about joining various data sources together, and the question was about what would be an example of the way you were able to join some of that data.
Yeah, so again, with the exemption data, we had a data set that had, and again, the property identification number was key, because if we had and the year, right? So if we had the property identification number and the year, then we could take different data sets. So say a PIN, a house entered into tax sale, the 2019 tax sale. We could then, sorry, I'm trying to pull the right data terms. We could locate that PIN and that year and whether they did or did not have a certain kind of tax exemption, and pull those together. Mm-hmm.
And we the reason why we did that matching specifically was because we wanted to isolate owner-occupied homes as opposed to like commercial properties or vacant lots or abandoned homes. So like the cleanest measure for that, as opposed to driving to each address and making sure that someone lived there or whatever, was to use those tax exemptions as a baseline for, or as a substitute for like owner-occupied homes or homes owned by seniors. And like that, those exemptions proved to be the best way we could approach those findings.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. Another question is coming about do we know how many tax sale properties had no homestead exemptions? And so might be abandoned or have an absentee landlord.
Yeah, so roughly of the tax deed, the tax deeds that the Cook County clerk produced in their data, so from roughly 2019 to or the first quarter of 2025, or the first month of 2025, let's say, there were about 3,000, maybe a little less than 3,000 tax deeds, and I think 1,077 of them had homeowners exemptions, so the remainder did not. There was some combination of residential properties. A lot of them are residential properties, vacant lots, commercial properties.
And just quickly on that, even that, like, because to Emeline's point, it was we were sort of stuck between these two assumptions where, like, on one end it's like, well, just because they have a homeowner exemption doesn't mean that the homeowner lives there anymore. They could have died, whatever. But at the same time, like, there are so many people who own homes that could have a homeowner exemption or a senior exemption who don't. I mean, like my dad, for example, my dad bought a house 5 years ago, and it wasn't until I learned the stuff for this story that I went to go check if he had a homeowner exemption, and he didn't. And then I checked the homes of his next door neighbors, and out of five, like 3 of them didn't either. So it's really an underreported sort of measure that sucks, because like, in order to get it, you have to like apply and send your information, blah blah blah. And it's really easy once you know how to do it, but that barrier to entry, knowing that it even exists, is very prevalent, I would say.
Thanks. Another audience question is that there's a line of thinking that systemic overassessment of properties in the south and the west sides of Cook County contributed to these foreclosures. Any thoughts or perspectives on that line of thinking?
Yeah, I'm definitely. I mean, I think it is true that these areas of the city do carry a larger share of the tax burden than they should, especially considering like the appeal system, who uses it, who doesn't, and like who ends up picking up the slack. It does fall on these folks, on these areas, on these homeowners who live in these areas the most. So, but at the same time, it was also really troubling and very sad to see that so many like so many of these homes, I forget now exactly what the stat was, but it's like half owed less than $1,000, right, or $1,200 or something. Um, and so even with like the overassessment and the tax burden that falls, like even with all that, some of these tax bills were relatively inexpensive or small, whatever, and yet still, families were losing homes. And so then that becomes I think a trickier because conversation, because like these homes did have homeowners exemptions, and they did have the senior exemption, and they did have senior freeze, so they did have everything that was supposed to lessen their burden, and still, they were being lost. And what we heard from folks really was that it was the kind of emergencies that put people behind in a lot of ways, medical emergencies or a loss of a job or a disability, things that really set people back.
And on top of that, I think, what someone I talked to told me and I think about a lot. So not to, I think like Carlos, I had a friend, a dear friend who got a proper, a warning letter from the Cook County Treasurer last fall saying, if you don't pay up on your taxes, you'll have a lien listed for sale. And I had barely any idea what that meant, right? And I think that's true I don't even own property. I think there are a lot of homeowners out there who understand that it's a possibility, but don't really understand what their rights are in that system. That's something we heard a lot. It's really county officials, it's policy people, it's the judges in these courtrooms, it's the lawyers for the tax lien industry, and maybe a handful of advocates who really understand how the system works. And there's just, even if you're really trying, it's very easy to get confused about the timeline and what you can do in those 3 years before you lose your home.
And just a comment on property taxes, just in general. I mean, one thing that I learned and I'm going to take away for the rest of my life from this reporting is just, I mean, obviously, I had a basic understanding of how regressive Illinois was at taxing people in this state, but it was worse than I ever imagined, because property taxes are in some ways like a wealth tax, right? It was a replacement for a more generalized wealth tax that used to exist, not only in Illinois, but really in the rest of the country, where, assets were taxed at a much more generalized way, where if you had like 20 stables and, whatever, like all of your assets were taxed. But all of that went away through like right-wing reforms, and property taxes became this sort of baseline level of financing government that has become incredibly regressive, because it is the only way really in which local communities can fund public schools, etc. But obviously that burden falls so much harder on like middle and working class communities, especially in places like Dalton, for example, which saw like a 25% spike in their property tax rates over the last few years. So, property taxes in general are just so regressive in Illinois, and really everywhere, because it is a faulty replacement of a wealth tax, but it's really the only kind of wealth tax that local communities can use to finance public services. So.
There's kind of a related question in the chat that Carlos, you provided an answer in the chat, and I just want to acknowledge that for folks who may not be caught up on the chat. The question was about whether there's a minimum amount that a homeowner has to fall behind on their tax bill for them to be a victim of foreclosure.
Yeah, like I answered in the chat, there is no minimum or maximum. It really is dependent on that property tax bill that goes unpaid. So again, Cook County is in 2 installments. So for example, you could pay the first installment in tax year 2015, but miss the second installment. And so a year after you miss that second installment payment, it becomes delinquent and goes up at the auction. And because you can't pay property taxes in 12-month installments, like you can't pay like you pay rent. It's every one of these 2 installments, which sucks, right? Because you have to come up with sometimes substantial sums of money 2 times a year. And it becomes very hard for people, especially in working class and middle class communities, where coming up with $3,000 at once is tricky. But it is predicated on that bill, like missing that whole bill, because you can't pay it off in payments in smaller installments. That's what goes up for the auction, is whatever that bill was that you couldn't pay all at once.
Another question was that we heard quite a bit of detailed data in this presentation about who are the victims of property tax foreclosure, what are their characteristics. What do we know about the tax investors that we heard a little bit about? Do we know anything about the characteristics of who these tax investors are?
Yeah, great question. And we will be continuing to report on the system through the month. So keep checking Injustice Watch's page. But from the data we have looked at, it's a mix of smaller local firms who've made a name for themselves. In some case, family firms that have been in the industry since the 80s, effectively. They're hedge funds, they're bigger investment vehicles from out of state, and also just individual people. Sometimes there are individual names that will buy 1 or 2 liens, just looking at the last 10 years of data. So it's a mix, but the majority of liens are bought by a small, I don't have the numbers handy, so I won't go into more specifics, but they are concentrated in a small number of LLCs or related LLCs that match that description of small firms and hedge funds. And
yeah, if I remember correctly, it's like the top 4 buyers accounted for 50% or more of all the liens sold. I think that's correct. So yeah, like Emeline said, it's like, local financiers. But really, something that also was important for me to learn is that these aren't landlords for the most part. Like these are not. They're more Wall Street types, because it's like it's money. It's not so much property, because like I think it's like only like between 5 to 7% of all the liens purchased in any given year make it all the way to foreclosure. So like 90+% of the liens end up, like, people pay off the lien before losing their home 90% of the time or more. So really it's a numbers game. It's like how many of these liens can I buy in bulk and then get a little bit of interest from each one. And so that is really the generator of the money. But for these larger firms that account for most of these liens, what we've been told, because we haven't been able to look at their books, but what we've been told is that half of their money comes from like the people paying off the lien. So from like the interest on, like, from like the 10, 20, 30% interest on $2,000, $3,000 lien. So half of the money comes from those, but the other half comes from selling the properties that they acquire through foreclosure. Because again, once you acquire a property through foreclosure, you can very easily acquire the rights to a property for less, that's worth more than $100,000 for less than $10,000. And so once you sell that off, even if you sell it at a discount, even if you sell it at 60%, 70% market rate, you're still cashing in a very hefty return. And so these big firms really, make money, half of their money from the small liens, and then the other money from the windfall profits from the foreclosed homes.
And I think we have time for one more question. So after someone is impacted by property tax foreclosure, after someone loses their equity, what do we know about what happens next to them?
yeah, there are different outcomes. I will say that, thinking of Miss Lewis, who is the woman who is really open and trusting about her situation, which is very difficult. She, I think, was in a rare subset of cases where she was able to, well, first of all, the tax buyer foreclosed and evicted her, so the sheriff showed up at her door. They broke it in 9 a.m. on a summer morning a couple of years ago. And she lived outside of that house for a year, but was able to negotiate with the help of pro bono law firm to take out a mortgage and buy it back, which is really just the sort of thing that demonstrates how much she cared about that house to take out a mortgage in her older years. But oftentimes people, and this is a little bit anecdotal, but people self-evict. You know, they know they've lost the house and they are too late to pay it off, or aren't able to gather the funds or take out a loan to pay it off. Sometimes the sheriff evicts you. And in some cases, people do sue the county, or have the knowledge and find the lawyers to sue the county for a payout from the indemnity fund, and can work out an agreement with the tax buyer to maybe pay us an amount of rent to stay in their house until that payout arrives from the county. So that's kind of a wide array of possibilities. There may be more that we haven't encountered, but it's really disruptive. And we've heard a lot from people who have experienced serious health crises because of the stress or resurgences of health issues, mental health, physical health, even in the best case scenarios.
And it sucks just quickly, because something related to how we ended the presentation with that quote from the Public Guardian is sort of thinking beyond what the Constitution requires Illinois to do with the system is, like for example, for folks who are facing foreclosure, sometimes like the best route for them is to sell the home before it's taken from them. Just sell it and try to get something out of it before that final cutoff point comes. But there's like a severe lack of like resources for people, not just like money, but also the wherewithal and the knowledge, to know, okay, maybe I should sell now, like the kind of like coaching and advice that folks need who are caught in the situation. Because oftentimes, like by the time tax foreclosure comes, by this point someone hasn't paid the taxes in a few years, and often that means that the home is also like either needs a serious maintenance or needs to replace the roof or whatever. And so people are caught in these very, very intense situations without any recourse. And so, yeah, they just kind of throw their hands and walk away. But it sucks because they walk away with nothing. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much to our presenters for very informative presentation on this important subject. Great presentation. We're now going to transition to the next part of our evening, and I think Michael will be guiding us through the next portion of our evening. So stay tuned for just a moment, and we'll be right back.